All right, it's recording. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. I am Sneha. I run the Value and Analytics practice here at Observe.ai, and I'm your host for the Impact Series. And in today's episode of the Impact Series, we're going to be talking about, how healthcare leaders are leveraging AI to raise the bar on service. But it's not just about focusing on the AI use cases in the healthcare industry. It's also talking about, what's that balance between, where you need to leverage AI and where a human in the loop is absolutely necessary for that service differentiation. Now, we have a guest today who approaches service the way healthcare should approach everything, right? And that is the real stakes is in the outcome. So Sarah Wright, she's led experienced teams across connected care and patient access. She's here to talk about, what it actually means to leverage AI the correct way in an industry where getting it wrong could have serious consequences. It's not just about, a bad NPS score. It's actually going to be impacting your patient outcomes. And so, Sarah, for the audience here, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then we can go from there.
Great. Thank you, Sneha. I'm Sarah Wright. I'm Vice President of Global Customer Service at ResMed. And I've spent my career really focused on outcomes, customer outcomes, patient outcomes, and really in industries where understanding your customer patient really is at the heart of however you're going to offer that support experience. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time for joining us for this episode. So let's get right into it, right? I think the very first section that I wanna cover is why healthcare is different. And the reason I refer to healthcare being different is I think there's a narrative in the industry that healthcare is usually the slowest to adopt new technology. And I see you're already smiling there. And I know we've had a few conversations about this before where, you've pushed back a little on that. So just for the audience here, like what's your take on this statement, right? Is healthcare really lagging? Is it just being, appropriately careful? What is the nuance around healthcare industry adopting new technology?
I think it's a really great question. And I'm certainly following industry trends. I'm really collaborating cross-functionally in medtech. And I've spent a lot of my role, patient access, customer service, really focused on those outcomes. And I think that at the end of the day, I wouldn't say that healthcare is lagging. It's more we've got to be very careful and cautious across this space to ensure that those outcomes really are meaningful. And I think that adoption of technology, in my opinion, is that we ought to really understand our customers and make sure our data is at a place that technology offers the right outcome or at least the right kind of choice. I think it's really important to make multiple channels available. Our patients and our customers are busy. They have many things, competing priorities that they're really trying to stretch themselves across. And so making ourselves available to our patients and our customers through technology channels really is about meeting them where they are. And so it's a really profoundly important space, and thinking about multiple channels is really trying to put that customer patient outcome at the heart of our experiences. And I think that's really what technology adoption ought to be, and is at least what I'm seeing as I'm exploring all the options out there. So I think that it's really about adopting in a meaningful way and ensuring that your data allows for those tech touches and those channel experiences to be as good as an experience interacting with one of our team members. But it really expands our access, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. And you made a really important point here. You talked about, being there's caution, right? It's not about the healthcare industry lagging in adopting new technology. It's just being more cautious. I mean, I know from a lot of the healthcare prospects and customers that I work with, I understand where that caution is coming from. But are you in a position to share a little bit more on what is the actual cost of getting AI wrong in the healthcare contact center space compared to
Um,
other industries, if you will?
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm hearing across all domains, not just healthcare. I think the big lift is coming down to the reality that many of our industries have spent so much time protecting our customer data sets, patient health information especially, and you're really mindful of all the regulatory frameworks across the different countries that you operate in. And so you've really got to be mindful there, bringing to life, AI, bringing to life meaningful AI touch points really comes down to bringing these different data sets that we've done a really good job of siloing and protecting and bringing them together to ensure that we can create that longitudinal context, where we really know who we're talking to, why we're interacting with them, what their needs might be, and imagining a world where we can anticipate, and through that anticipation, through historical experiences with our companies, really it allows for us to predict what that, customer patient might want. And then again, it really does allow us to um, implement this technology in a way that is a good experience externally. Cost, I think it really comes down to assessing what is the core technology that's going to be in that ecosystem that drives that external experience. And what I've seen, and in my opinion, it's really about starting internally, looking at what problems you want to solve. Is it an inefficiency? Is it a lack of capacity? Is it a lack of onboarding speed? Is it a lack of expertise in certain areas? I think it's really about exploring internally how you can remove friction, and implementing these tools in that context. And that allows, not only for it to be more of a cautious approach to ensure we're really fine tuning what you want to do before it is external, but ultimately, in all the environments I'm collaborating in, it's very difficult to bring all those data sets together quickly. So really trying to identify those meaningful data sources to bring to life that context. And I think that internally, it also drives a bit of that change management where you have employee experience being enabled and changing and allowing those team members to understand they play a really important role in that oversight as you think about expanding tools and technology, potentially to that external context. So I don't have a estimate on exact cost, except I would say the biggest challenge I think companies really are facing in all of the webinars I'm participating in is really about the cost of readying adjacent systems in order to bring to life those meaningful AI experiences. And so, certainly I'm not done my discovery. I spent a lot of time consuming, but those are the trends that I'm seeing across the board, and it doesn't seem to be specific to healthcare.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, the cost of having proper infrastructure, data readiness, adjacent systems to make sure, all the different channels and systems are interacting. So you're able to provide that seamless, customer service or experience. It's not just, limited to healthcare. We are seeing this across, other industries like retail, ed tech, travel too. Um, I think this is a great segue into the next section. So while we are talking about data readiness and adjacent systems, etc., and that's one of the costs of getting AI wrong in the healthcare industry. If I do want to flip the switch and talk a little bit about where AI is actually earning its place, right, in the specific domain. So if you had to draw a line on one side, things AI should be doing in the healthcare contact centers today, and then on the other, things that should absolutely not, right? We need a human in the loop for those type of experiences. Where would that line fall for you?
I think this line is it's a moving space, right? So I think it moves all the time, but I would say that some no regrets lines to draw are on those low complexity, high volume inquiries. And again, I would say this applies cross domain, but I think in healthcare, in many cases, there's a component of people not necessarily being medically literate in what they've been diagnosed in, or in some cases they're not sure exactly what to do, or where their medical equipment provider might be. And so there's many of these inquiries in the context of healthcare. Um, but then there's many inquiries where simply anyone might want to know where a store or a dealer might be located in any, retail experience. And so I think it's starting with those really low complexity, high volume inquiries. They're taxing on teams, and they really don't challenge the most valuable resource we all have. And really, I think that what we're thinking about as leaders in customer service, in experience, in patient experience, is really about having that human connection when it drives brand differentiation or a different outcome, really being the heroes of experiences. I think of, my team members as some of the most valuable contributors to our promise to our customers. We have the most captive time with our customers. And so we ought not bring low value, highly repeatable content through that path. Rather, elevating those team members to really be the oversight as we develop and build out these tools and technology, really advocating along with leadership to really ensure that we're, exploring the right things, understanding concerns, but really ensuring that there's a crisp understanding of what problems we are solving and what we're not going to try and solve for. And so I think it's really a no regrets move to look at things that, gosh, put yourself in our patient or customer's shoes. Think about what we expect as consumers externally. I think at the very least, imagining that people that interact with products or services would experience or expect the same sort of thing, ease of assistance when something goes awry, understanding where they can go and get a product or a component to ensure that a device or a product that they've bought works properly. So I think it really comes down to, looking up an order status inquiry, understanding basic troubleshooting, really just understanding the first steps to the path to resolution. And from there, allowing those customers, those patients to decide, was that enough or do I need to go further in this experience? And making sure that if your customers or patients have interacted with you to get through to your teams, making sure your teams know that so that it can be referenced and that connectedness happens along that journey. And so rather than asking someone who they are again, acknowledging that maybe that self-serve didn't work or that they've still chosen to come through and interact with the team. So it's really about those checks and balances, but solving for those things that are highly repeatable, really not too difficult, but it allows to free up that capacity within the team to really bring to life that elevation of team members. Because, again, it can create capacity, but that capacity can be reinvested into really high value opportunities that potentially teams just don't have that capacity without technology.
Yeah. You actually answered a few of my follow-up questions too. So I was actually going to talk about, you talked about low complexity, high volume use cases. You gave some examples around there. I think my follow-up question through that was going to be, what does good versus bad experience look like, for those examples that you provided? And I think you already touched on a few points. You talked about, what's the, like, how seamless is the experience? How easy is it, for the customers to, or for the patients to leverage, whatever mode of communication, you're using. Not just that, are they feeling heard? Do they feel there's enough information transfer so they don't have to repeat themselves? Are there any other failure modes that you're, actively looking at when you're trying to deploy these AI use cases?
You know, it tends to be with healthcare that people don't have oftentimes a choice to interact with companies. They need that information. And so I would say that we have to do this right when you're thinking about healthcare. I don't think that um, I don't think that I've seen a lot of experiences where it's been kind of, a complete free for all. Rather, I think it's really important to track and look at where's the source of the information that solves that problem. How easy is it to access? How often is it being updated? Again, making sure that we're correctly solutioning the inquiry. There's nothing more frustrating than if you engage with self-serve tools and you don't get anywhere. You get only partially there, and then you have to break away from that and ultimately call or email in. And I think that really it's understanding those failure rates, understanding, what's not working, and then really building a roadmap as you deploy these tools to continue to have it, more accurate and deflecting more and more. But ultimately, I think that as all industries are testing with these tools and technology, it's so important that we're watching those examples of CSAT, NPS, CES scores. Are we seeing, customers and or patients, describing more friction, it being more difficult, or is the feedback consistent with how it's always been? I think those indicators are really important to watch to ensure that while access to information and meeting our customers where they are through more channels is a great ambition, but ensuring again that those success rates through those channels are high and that the sentiment expressed from our customers is, again, is on par with where you'd want around outcomes. And I think that's the way to cautiously approach these things. And again, it's one of those topics that I hear that comes up a lot is really understanding what are your KPIs, and really not making it all just about cost savings, right?
Yeah.
Or it's got to be a good experience. Yes, you can get to cost savings. In many cases, you can get to more capacity or certainly more efficiency, but it really does have to return, because if your customers get frustrated by new channels, the calls and emails get longer and more difficult to solve. And I think it's really about avoiding, a need for those customers to drop out of those channels and try to come back through historical pathways that have been successful for them.
Yeah, I love that, especially your last call out on monitoring sentiment, CSAT, NPS, CES scores. Once you start deploying these use cases, and I think for the audience too, like a great way for you to understand, whether the initiative around AI is being successful for you is you can one look at historical CES, NPS, CSAT scores where the humans were involved in that interaction. You can look at interactions where AI is autonomously handling that, and what does the CSAT score look like there? And then you're also obviously going to have interactions which are partial augmentation, right? So information gathering, maybe just identifying the intent of the conversation, that's getting handled by the AI, and then it gets transferred to an actual human for the remainder of the conversation. So across all these different types of deployments, try and compare what the sentiment looks like. And this is going to give you like a great picture of what we like to call it as voice of the patient or voice of the customer. I really love that, Sarah. Thank you for providing that. Uh, let's talk a little bit about, the employee side of things when it comes to deploying this. I think, everybody keeps talking a lot about what the customer service side of things should look like, how the customer should feel. There's also a huge uplift when it comes to change management or when it comes to just adoption of all this new technology and tooling, not just within the healthcare space, in the industry in general. So we talk a lot about the patient, but can you tell us a little bit about how does agentic AI fundamentally change the daily life of a frontline healthcare worker?
Yeah, I think this has to be at the heart of a lot of this change. It can't just simply be about an external change. Really, you have to have employees understanding what this ultimately does and what it unlocks. And I find it really interesting. Our employees have asked, historically in many of my environments for bigger monitors or more screens to have more and more windows open as they're trying to really make it look good externally for customers and patients. And it's hard for these employees to imagine a world without friction, where information just flows easily. They're often like a duck kind of floating on the surface, but their feet are paddling under that water. And really, they're really trying to maintain that connection with customers and patients while they find correct information, complete information. They verify accounts, they keep good case notes. I think that really what was so key in all of the partners that I've spoken with, but also in just talking across my teams historically, is really making employees a part of things, getting them excited. Having employees, in the case of AI, you ask a customer service employees, worst parts of their day. And in many cases, it comes down to the administrative burden that they have while also being the face of a company and trying to either de-escalate or solution an issue. And imagining a world where, for example, case notes can be automatically captured so that the customer service professional is either de-escalating, upselling, saving an account, whatever that heroic outcome is. We shouldn't be pulling their brain and their focus in and out of record keeping and building a connection and driving brand affinity. How can you imagine what that looks like? And I think that, when you have your employees surfacing the worst parts of their day and having a lot of these tools and technology, a lot of the other no regrets implementations are those things, and the note taking, the categorization, but also having those team members surface their pain points and then showing them that that's part of the roadmap and part of the plan. Actually, to your point on change, builds this really authentic grassroots change group. And so it's not just leaders saying, we need to implement these tools, we need to do things differently, faster, better. We're saying, let's remove friction from your day. Let's allow you to really be present in that heroic outcome for that customer. And, ultimately, that's where we want people. If you're going to do work in customer service because you love it, we ought to really allow people to excel there. And so I think that's where these tools are really doubling down on EX enhancements. And having good EX makes them excited about that user experience. And they're really curious and creative around, okay, wow, how could we remove more friction from our world, from our external customer and patients world? So that's something that I think has been quite magical and consistent in all the groups I'm participating in these discussions, is really around the employees becoming the biggest advocates for these tools. In many cases in customer service, tools that made team members really nervous when they first heard about them,
Yeah.
and rather than them being kind of their teammate, that really unlocks their ability to do the magic that they do.
Yeah, you made a really good point about an internal sell for the employee being, hey, let's take away, your friction, let's reduce your administrative burden, which I think is a great sell to bring employees on board this experience. Um, and you also talked about, towards the very end, you talked about, there's hesitation, there's a lot of like anxiety, nervousness around adopting something like this, and that's usually what we've seen across the industry too, where the minute people talk about, hey, we want to deploy AI for these use cases, I think automation in people's minds equates to like headcount elimination, right? And so I like that, reducing administrative burden is like one way to bring employees along that experience. But I think the other side to this is, as much as we're helping them reduce administrative burden, it just means that the employees now have to focus more on the complex use cases, the more emotional high stakes use cases, right? What that means is they have to upskill themselves if they've not handled that as the primary use case for the time that they've spent in serving the customers. And so how do you think about addressing that fear of, I wouldn't maybe fear is the wrong word. Let's just say change management again, right? So the change management that it takes to upskill an employee for the complex use cases that is now going to become primary for them.
I think it's a great question, but I would say that I've worked across a few different domains where, user security has been at the core of what you're trying to do. And at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to, whether it's town halls, whether it's um, regular updates on, how your organization is looking at these technologies. I think what's really interesting in all of the healthcare and med tech spaces that I participate in, this is a common challenge, right? You have a situation where people are nervous about technology deployment. And in some cases, I don't even think it's because they are fearful of technology, but you're hearing a lot of information out there right now about, deployments that are failing or how to do it right, what to avoid. And I think that really what employees are looking for is confidence in the approach. And I think that's really, being curious, letting people ask questions whenever a new technology is being discussed in any environment, I think is really important. And having that space for employees to, ask within their teams and have those teams raise any additional questions is really the best way that I think organizations can face this. Because let's face it, this is something that is very unnerving in customer service, an industry that hasn't been that focused on technology. It's really been about record keeping, accuracy of the workflows or processes that you're discussing, ensuring that the person leaves that interaction satisfied. But really, this is about, deploying technology that in many cases the organizations that they work within may not be that skilled in or experienced in. And so I think that adds to a bit of the uncertainty. And I think it's just saying it out loud. I think uncertainty is normal, but I think having forums where people can express their questions, their curiosity, and making sure, I think organizations are doing a good job, allowing people to do lunch and learns and things like that to really get more skilled. But what's clear, I think, to all employees in all domains is that this is here to stay. And so how can you get on board, and not just get on board, but how can you show up differently so that we can be really successful at how we adopt? I think that's the sky's the limit with how we approach these things. And so I think just allowing teams to express that. And hey, I think some team members may say, I'm not interested in this anymore. Or I don't, that wasn't what I liked, this type of experience in my job. I'm not really interested in that. And that's okay too. I think employees need to decide, how comfortable they are with these things. But giving it a chance and starting with curiosity, I think is really the best way for us to bring our teams along on these, adoptions. I think you're going to see a lot of technology discussions across customer service.
Yeah. So the employee experience, EX is one side to it, right? Like you've brought up some great points on how to get the employees on board. What does it really take to convince the executives who are skeptical about, deploying AI or investing in AI solutions? So yes, you can talk about how it's going to change the customer experience. You can talk about how it's going to change or revamp the employee experience. But a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders are very risk averse, right? And so in organizations where the risk culture is pretty strong, what's the internal sell for the executives to invest in AI?
I think this is really important for any leader is to know your audience and know how to describe the change you're going after or the technology you're exploring. At the end of the day, you really do want an executive team to buy into the direction of a team or of a organization. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to your ability to prove it out. I think that for me, whenever I'm going to my executive team in any of the roles that I've had, I'm always starting with a data set, understanding what ultimately I need to present on the topic, not over communicating, keeping it really crisp on whether our use cases are, what problems we're solving, whether or not we're entering proofs of concept and what we hope to get out of that. But it's really about communication. I think for me, using AI sometimes can be your best friend at being able to convey the right message using any of the open AI options that you like to engage with. For me, I've gone round for round, with chat on how I might want to engage a problem or look at something. And this can be at work, in life, in general. But I think when you're speaking with your executive teams, really succinct storyline and what is that outcome? What are we going to get to? Because again, I think in any company, the execs are there to protect our, customers or patients in whatever domain you're in. And it has to really prove the value. And it has to also be really exciting. Because I think there's limitless potential with the technology today to unlock value, to really double down on our experiences for our customers and patients. And so I think it's really about presenting and showing. In my case, I talk in many environments about longitudinal context and needing to, query, ChatGPT to help me build a visual so that I can talk to something like that. So that when I'm in discussions about AI, it's not simply, deflecting it. It's saying, hey, we can do this, but we need to understand this data set from a CRM, for example, this data set from an ERP, this data set from a CCaaS tool set. So it's really about pulling the right data at the right time so that the technology you're deploying does return on that investment. So I think that's it, is that really using the technology sometimes gives you the guardrails or the pitch that you need to really get the idea out there clearly and what that benefit back is. And really, I think being in circles right now, there's so many good webinars out there, so many good groups you can participate in discussions on technology, in med tech, in healthcare, but also in customer service. And again, I think that also is another really great place to kind of bounce off how you're describing these problems, because we are not alone. I think every leader is trying to become as much of an expert as we can, find the right technology to help us implement and unlock the value we see, but also be able to articulate what we're doing and why. So it's a pretty big adventure we're all on, I think, at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there was another question that I wanted to ask, and this is with in regards to the longitudinal context that you brought up, right? So that's the idea that if AI truly knows who it's talking to, patients will actually start trusting it more. From your experience, or just just based on, like, all the different AI deployments that you have seen in the healthcare industry, how close is the industry to that? And what do you think it's going to take to get there?
We're getting closer and closer every day. I had an experience recently, not in healthcare, but it was actually with an airline company, and it was so good that I actually did a survey because I couldn't believe how slick this experience was. And I think it really Um, I think we're pretty close in healthcare. I mean, as you can imagine, patient health information is so important for companies to protect that it's really about identity management and making sure that you can absolutely validate that you're interacting with the person you're meant to be interacting with. And I think that's really the big problem to solve. And it has to be through all channels. So if you know or recognize, for example, a patient can have multiple personas with one company. They could be, for example, they could be somebody who consumes products or services through their medical provider. They could also be somebody that buys those products as a cash pay option from time to time. They could also be somebody that influences the care of a family member and therefore, being able to reference who that patient and or customer and or the different channels that they may interact in, I think is one of those really difficult things to be able to solve for. So I think identity management is the theme I'm seeing come up as one of the biggest challenges there. But we're seeing really great things and we're seeing really great experiences being demonstrated, especially in a lot of these, conferences and technology expos. I don't think we're far off at all. Really, it comes down to bringing your IT teams in to the dreams you have as CX or CS leaders and really helping them understand because for all this time they've been protecting data and storing it in separate containers that are really secure. And now we're saying, liberate that data set to drive these amazing experiences. And so it's really about finding that common ground, finding that balance to ensure the data is protected but accessible at the right time to really drive that meaningful experience. So I don't have an estimate on exact time, but I would say every day I see something that appears to get us closer and closer.
Yeah, I like how you put together the whole identity management. I think that's huge, and it goes back to CX, EX, brand experience, everything, right? So that is it is at the core of all of these things. So, not just companies in the healthcare space. I guess any company who's trying to deploy AI for, CX, EX use cases needs to think about um, information access, needs to think about identity management. I know we're nearing time, so for the audience, I just want to recap a few things that stood out for me in this discussion. Right, one was when it comes to one is healthcare is not lagging. We It's just an agency that requires more precision, right? Because the outcome associated with in the healthcare space is a lot more vulnerable compared to a lot of other industries. So that's one thing. The other piece is when we are thinking about deploying these AI use cases in healthcare, definitely start with like low complexity, high volume use cases or low complexity, high value use cases too, right? So start there. Always have guardrails. Bring your employees, people delivering the CX. So bring them on board because they need to be on board before they can deliver unparalleled brand experience. And so one way to think about that is just helping them understand how we can reduce administrative burden, how we can remove friction points from their daily lives. At the same time, give them the opportunity to just express their opinion, help them do lunch and learns, create a lot of opportunities for them to engage in the process with a lot of curiosity. And there's also the side where you have to convey something, make the business case to the executives, right? And so in a lot of those conversations, I think multi-threading is really critical because you're going to have executives from different teams, from procurement, from customer experience, from maybe other teams that are involved in this experience, but maybe even somebody from marketing. So you need to make sure that all leaders they understand not just the quantitative but also the ancillary benefits that come with deploying AI. And then towards the end, we talked a lot about the omni-channel experience, right? So when you're trying to design these AI assisted experiences, especially for patients who are usually sleep deprived or going through so many different problems, there's a lot more at stake for you to handle. And so making sure that they don't have to repeat themselves, making sure that the effort on their end is as minimal as possible. If something is, if I reach out over chat and I need to switch to, call, then that information is context is getting preserved across multiple channels. So these are all some great points for, anybody in the healthcare space to thinking about deploying AI to get started with. I think, Sarah, for the audience, the one question that I really want to wrap up with, actually two, but feel free to choose which one you want. One is, according to you, 3 years from now, what would you like the ideal state of the healthcare contact center to look like? What does that AI human agent ratio look like for you? That's one question. Or the other one is, we have a lot of people in the audience. We have a lot of people who are going to be who are still in the process of, yeah, have a lot of pressure to leverage AI in my company. I don't know where to begin, right? So, what would be that one piece of advice for them on where they should think about starting this journey?
I'm going to take your second question. You know, it's really daunting to figure out where you're going to start. I think start with your data. Even if you have minimal data, what are your longest calls? What are the reasons that people are calling back, so not achieving first contact resolution? If you happen to measure any kind of a NPS, CSAT, CES, whatever you're measuring, look for where your negative scores are. At the end of the day, you really need to decide, what problem am I solving? Am I improving our brand experience? Am I removing friction? Am I increasing capacity? What is it that you're really trying to get at? Again, solving one problem at a time. You've really got to just understand, who is this problem affecting? What is the team that's going to need to really implement this change? And again, bringing them along for that. Oftentimes, when you've got the number one call or email driver, that's not something that the team enjoys handling. They're really just kind of going through on autopilot to handle those interactions. And so I think that starting there, similar to any team, what is one thing that if we got rid of that, it would make your day? Many examples, they're the same opportunities as identified by the leadership team within that customer service team. So I think really just eating an elephant one bite at a time, not overdoing it, and making sure that you've got a good starting set of data to be able to compare your results to. There's a big expectation that AI deployment saves money. And I would say the most common discussion point I'm hearing in a lot of environments is that that's actually not being realized, especially right away. In many cases, you talked about it earlier about the oversight component or leveling up. In many cases, when someone deploys these tools, they might think that they're immediately going to be able to reduce headcount by X% or reinvest 30% of their capacity into a new project. But oftentimes that's not realized until, again, it's really smoothing out, understanding, figuring out where AI may be failing. And it's usually those team members that were answering those questions that are part of that solutioning. And so I think just being comfortable challenging that idea that AI immediately returns a headcount savings. I think that can be true down the line, but first it's got to be built with the team as part of that journey.
Absolutely. And thanks for the last portion on, not getting immediate return on investment, right? I think this is where a lot of customers get it wrong, where they expect, okay, it's just, a touch of a button, things are going to magically, I'm going to be able to save like, millions of dollars. It's usually not the case. And that's because people are not accounting for, the time it takes in getting your infrastructure ready for AI to work properly. It's garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you don't have right data, you're not going to get the right outcomes. Two is, people also do not account for how much change management needs to and training needs to happen for everybody to be on board with the experience that AI is going to deliver. Then there's implementation and testing. There's rounds and rounds of testing before everybody on the team feels comfortable enough to move this from a pilot to a production stage, because in pilot you're still testing it in very safe environments, right? When it goes into production, like, you don't know what's going to break, and if it does break, like, you need to have people who are going to be held accountable for that to be in place. So there's just so much governance and strategy and data that people need to think about before actually starting to see the returns, that it is definitely something for a lot of leaders to keep in mind. Like, don't go in with the expectation that this is going to immediately change my business overnight. It will change, over time. So yeah, thank you for that. Sarah, I really appreciate you spending your time today sharing such valuable insights with me, with the audience. I'm sure there's a lot for the audience to unpack as we send over the recording for this webinar to them. But thank you so much for taking the time for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you to the audience for listening in. We will be sending over the recording of this webinar. But yeah, that's about it for this webinar. Thank you all.